So the Steam Spring Sale is now in full swing, and naturally you can find tons of great deals on a range of amazing games for the Steam Deck. So what I wanted to do today was highlight a few games that I would personally recommend, having played them myself. Now, full disclosure, I have not played every single one of these on the Steam Deck. A few of them I played on the PS5, but nonetheless, if it's on this list, it's definitely playable on deck, if not straight up verified. So all of that being said, let's go ahead and kick this list off with some easily recommendable AAA fare, starting with Miles Morales. Now right now you can get Spider-Man Miles Morales for $33.49, which is about 33% off, and based on your previous comments, I know a lot of people were really looking forward to this one, and with good reason. It's every bit as good as the 2018 Spider-Man, and there's no better time to jump in, especially with Spider-Man 2 on the horizon. Now initially I'll admit I was skeptical about Miles Morales, not because I thought the quality of the game would be bad, but rather I was just kind of worried that as a sort of standalone title that there really wouldn't be enough content to justify the price. But as a pretty big Marvel fan and having loved the original Spider-Man game, I jumped in at full price and was completely satisfied with what I got. Not just because the mechanics were as tight as they'd ever been, or to check out Miles' unique abilities compared to Parker's, but it also has some really fun story beats with really good character drama. The setup is that Peter is taking a few weeks off from Spider-Manning to help Mary Jane on an assignment abroad, and that leaves Miles as the only Spider-Man left to watch over the city. And in pretty short order, Miles finds himself caught up in a conflict between the Underground and the Roxxon Corporation, which again he'll have to deal with on his own as the city's only Spider-Man. And while the premise might not be quite as poignant as Parker's story in the first Spider-Man game, it's still touching and well executed, and if you're all a Spider-Man fan, you definitely won't be disappointed. Now I played through this one on the PS5 right at launch, but by all accounts it performs really well on the Steam Deck too, though certainly more comfortably around 30 FPS. You can get closer to 60 as long as you don't mind scaling back the settings to medium or low, but that really depends on whether you prefer visual fidelity to frame rate. And as a game that's heavily action focused, I personally tend to favor frame rate for games like this, but hey, to each their own. And speaking of AAA open worlds, this next game really doesn't need any introduction considering it's been released across 3 different console generations at this point, and that would be Grand Theft Auto V. Coming in at $14.99, maybe you've already played this since it's been around for about a decade at this point, but considering GTA games are pretty much the gold standard for open world chaos, and again, the fact that it's about 60% off at $14.99 versus $35, I had to at least mention it. Ping-ponging back and forth between a hustler, a bank robber, and a total psychopath, GTA 5 has you mixing it up once again with the various elements of the criminal underworld. It's big, loud, bombastic fun, and there's just loads to do in San Andreas. Granted, it's not exactly the same as the San Andreas from, well, San Andreas, but still, if you love open world action games with an overwhelming amount of content and side activities, you really can't go wrong here. Deck performance is pretty solid as well, making it an easy recommendation if you're looking for open world action on the go. Although you will have to jump through Rockstar's launcher initially, but after that jumping in and out of GTA 5 is pretty straightforward, and it's probably one of the most polished deck experiences I've played. Again, it is turning 10 years old in 2023, so that's not really surprising, but it is kind of magical to play a game like this on this scale in the handheld form with solid graphics that don't tank system performance. And speaking of open world games with solid visuals, albeit far more cartoonish visuals, my next recommendation would be Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. Now, I wouldn't call myself a super fan of DBZ, but I did grow up watching it after school with friends, and I think what I love most about this game is how it manages to condense a lot of those early storylines into just playable adventures. So for me personally, it was a real blast revisiting a lot of those earlier arcs and kind of getting to live through them, and throwing down with a bunch of classic characters like Vegeta, Frieza, Cell, and just a ton of others is a whole lot of fun. And what really brings the whole thing to life here are the visuals, which are absolutely stunning. I remember playing Budokai 3 back on the PS2 days and being completely blown away at how well it mirrored the visuals of the show, but Kakarot takes it to an entirely different level, and at times it feels like you're just watching the anime. They just really nailed the feel of the show here, and it's just so satisfying getting in these like bombastic air battles and teleporting around, pummeling your opponents, or unleashing classic special attacks. It's not a perfect game by any stretch of the imagination, and I can see why reviews were mixed around launch, but it is definitely entertaining, and if you have any fondness for DBZ at all, I can't imagine you'll have a bad time with it. Particularly on the Steam Deck, where even though it's listed as unsupported, at least in my time testing the demo at the default settings, it plays pretty close to 60 FPS with occasional dips here and there. But by and large, I'd have no qualms about playing it on the Steam Deck, and I just might do that, except I may end up streaming it from my PS5 since I've already put in a ton of time on this game on the PS4, so I wouldn't be buying it just for the deck necessarily. Although at 75% off for $14.99, I am very tempted to take the leap and to just cruise around the open world living out my Super Saiyan fantasies on the go. Now next up, comparatively speaking to DBZ, I would say this is a much more grounded experience. However, I would hesitate to call it AAA, but it's a game that I've been waiting to go on sale for quite some time, and it finally did, so I definitely snatched it up for myself, but that would be Bloody Spell. Bloody Spell is a martial arts third-person action adventure that runs well on the Steam Deck, but just to set expectations, as an indie game, this has some very rough edges. For starters, the English translation is hit or miss at best, and some of the dialogues have no English option at all, so it's sort of unintentionally cryptic rather than purposefully cryptic in, like, say, Tunic, for example. And while it looks pretty good visually with some good environmental variety the deeper in you get, I wouldn't call it earth-shattering or anything. But despite its shortcomings, I gotta say the combat is definitely addictive. Bloody Spell definitely wears its influences on its sleeve, taking some clear cues from games like Bayonetta or God of War, but it still manages to feel unique. If you're into fast-paced combat that lets you mix up the action with a variety of weapons at your disposal, it's certainly worth a look. Also, every weapon I tried out felt distinct and fun to experiment with, whether that was a giant greatsword, a spear, or the nimbler dual blades. But considering you can plow through the campaign in about 5 to 10 hours and some obvious jankness on display here, snatching this up at 75% off for around $6 instead of its normal $25 seemed like the right price to dive into its offerings if you want to blow away an afternoon with some fast hack-and-slash action. Next up, moving on to Simpler Fare, is a game that I've put hundreds and hundreds of hours into over the years, and it still remains my favorite puzzle game to this day, and that would be Lumines Remastered. Coming in at $4.49 instead of its normal $14.99 price point, I promise this will be way worth your time as long as you enjoy Tetris-esque puzzlers with a clean visual style and addicting mechanics. At its core, your only job is to make squares and rectangles of the same contiguous color, and then wait for a line to sweep across the screen and clear them. But it's definitely an easy to learn, difficult to master sort of game. You can build combos with connected squares, and you'll have to contend not only with the variation in the pieces as they fall, but also the tempo of one stage to the next can change dramatically. In turn, this forces you to mix up your strategy for a high score from one round to the next. On faster stages, you might build as quickly as possible to maximize your combo score, but on slower stages you have to be more mindful, as building up a massive combo might put you in a tight spot as you wait for the much slower line to sweep across the screen. So it's totally fun at face value with a unique spin on the genre, but it sure doesn't hurt that every stage looks better than the last, with really crisp visuals, gorgeous particle effects, and a near flawless soundtrack where just about every track is an enjoyable listen as you spin and drop blocks to the beat of the music. And as a 2D game, it performs pretty much flawlessly on the Steam Deck without taxing its resources in any significant way. It's incredibly addictive from the jump, and at $4.49 it's one of the most confident recommendations I can make as a solid value for the spring sale. And finally, this last entry probably will tax your Steam Deck's battery, but to be fair, it is a completely gorgeous game, and at $19.99 I couldn't not recommend this because I've had so much fun with it over the years, albeit on Xbox, and that would be Sea of Thieves. Now, by all rights, if you're a Game Pass subscriber, you could just stream this to your Steam Deck and save your battery, but if you're playing docked or tethered to a beefy backup battery, it is completely crazy to me how well this game works on the Steam Deck. At the default settings, it's a pretty smooth experience that doesn't quite keep a constant 60 FPS, but with some tweaks or dropping your frame rate and refresh rate, I'm sure you could keep a solid 40 or 50 FPS. But performance aside, Sea of Thieves is just a great game and probably my favorite pirate simulator ever. If you've never played before, you'll be taking command of a ship and doing pirate stuff, like having sea battles, hunting for treasure, and battling lots and lots of reanimated skellies. That all sounds pretty standard for the most part, but where it really shines is in its gameplay loop and the sense of accomplishment that you get from completing voyages for the various trading companies in its world. Sea of Thieves only holds your hand long enough to explain the basic mechanics, but it will absolutely not spoon-feed you rewards. You'll have to decipher clues about where treasure might be hidden, and then go out and explore manually on some pretty massive islands in some cases to piece together where the loot is hidden. And in between all of this, you'll also have to navigate the high seas, either in a smaller 1- or 2-man ship like the sloop, or coordinate carefully with your crew to man larger ships with more firepower like the brigantine or the top-tier galleons. Managing the pros and cons of a larger ship versus a smaller ship is a lot of fun in its own right, especially when you start considering how much ship maintenance will be involved if you do come under attack and start taking on water. The entire process is absolutely thrilling in its own right, and I can honestly say that while Sea of Thieves may have occasional moments of frustration where you're trying to figure out where exactly this treasure is on a map, I will say there is never a dull moment in Sea of Thieves. Especially if you're playing with friends, which really is the best way to enjoy Sea of Thieves anyways. So if you're looking for some high seas adventure that is chock full of mystery and memorable moments, $19.99 is an absolute steal for the hundreds of hours that you could sink into Sea of Thieves. Alright, so there you have it. Videos like this are always a challenge because obviously everybody has different tastes and preferences in terms of the games that they want to play, but I did at least try to provide a handful of games that I thought had some pretty universal appeal and were just really a whole lot of fun in their own right, and all the better if you can get them at a deep discount. So those are some of the games that I am recommending, but hey, what about you? Are there any games that you would recommend from the spring sale that I might have overlooked or you think should have been included on this list? If so, please do let me know in the comments below because I would love to hear about what you're playing or something that I might miss out on. So yeah, as always, thank you so much for your time. Have an amazing day, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.